Hello, Ed.
Hi, Leo.
Thank you for talking to us today and taking the time to talk about your work.
No worries.
Yeah, I kind of thought it would be a good idea, firstly, to get a good general understanding of the context for this exhibition. Basically, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the grey area of this gallery and what type of gallery it is and how you came to do a residency here, basically.
Well, it's a basement, odd little space. It's a really tiny gallery, and I think the literal way which I got involved was just by volunteering as an art student at University of Brighton. Getting involved with an active and interesting gallery when I arrived was kind of something I really wanted to do. So I got involved volunteering, simply helping out, setting up shows and kind of working on the door events. So it was kind of really mundane things like that, but just kind of really working out and getting involved with how a gallery works.
So it's basically a small independent art gallery, and you helped out here, and then it came about that they were interested in your work that you were doing.
Yeah, interested in getting a diverse range of artists in because it's a return to form. Grey area used to be a kind of joint studio and gallery space.
Okay.
So it's a return to that in a sense.
Yeah, it definitely feels like a small studio space.
Yeah.
But they always have really interesting stuff here. Really, like I said, have a variety. So it's interesting to ask basically someone like you who's maybe more a painter, to come down and use it as a studio for a week and then do work here as well.
Well, it was liberating because Dan Parajaman, guy that set up Grey and runs it, said, you can do anything. You don't have to do an event. You don't have to do. You don't have to feel there's any pressure, but feel that you can do what you like. So I thought, okay, it's a residency, so I have a week, so it's very time restrictive. So I set myself a goal of what to do and thought, as you say, I'm a
Well,
artist.
I was actually going to get to how that time affected your work in a second.
Yeah.
But briefly, first, it'd be good to get if you could give a very brief, just quite technical description of what you've done here and how the space is set up.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're sitting in front of the back of the painting, and through that way is a doorway into which you are encouraged. I mean, it isn't a be or end all, but you're encouraged to go and view the painting from the front. So it's built and constructed and painted down here in its entirety.
Yeah, it wouldn't fit down here if you made it outside, for example.
Yeah, I don't think so. I'm going to try and get it out, but I might have to destroy it. Yeah. But I like the idea of something that was really site specific. Yeah. Something that it felt a bit like if I was to bring paintings down here, or even canvases that I'd already built, it almost felt like cheating because it's like bringing in outside things and just sort of using it as a space to exhibit in.
Yeah, I suppose you were given a residency here for a week, and so to just use it as a dumping ground or an exhibition space of work you've done elsewhere is like what effect do you think that would have?
I think it's quite a sterile effect, really, because you're bringing in an exhibition anyway. You're presenting work to people, and I think if I was doing that in a space where it was a residency, I don't think it would. It's not a residency. That's a week set up for an exhibition. Yeah. I've been sweeping floors for 5 days. This is fine.
Yeah. I wonder if that's a distinction you can make between smaller art galleries and like big international ones, where I don't really know how they operate, but in this kind of environment, they don't really. That the audience is not the same. They don't have like a big wide audience, and so the idea of you just bringing in work here to be displayed might be at best naive. Who, you know what I mean? Like who you're going to show it to and why? Yeah. So you could just show it, for example, in all over the place if you wanted to. Well, it's more about. I imagine there's something to be garnered from being in this space and making work in this space, and how that affects your practice.
So it is really important, and I think that only became important after I had accepted to do the residency and was thinking intensively about what I was going to do. And logistically thinking, well, example, how am I going to get work down there, or how am I going to move people around the space, because the space is important to the grey area. It's like a cave or a little bunker. It's kind of, and I felt, well, it is important for me, having sat here and invigilated and soaked up the space. Maybe I just kind of want to project that out into the work.
Sure, yeah. Something I was going to ask you actually was about the, it's kind of, well, I wanted to go through the different restrictions or liberating elements this kind of space how it alters your practice.
Yeah.
Specifically, it'd be good to ask a little bit about the time that you had. You had a week.
Yeah.
I wanted to know, effectively, in what way did it dictate your work, and how would this differ from your normal practice?
Yeah.
How long you would normally spend and that kind of thing. So temporally speaking, how does it affect your work?
Well, I'd usually kind of leisurely make a canvas and stretch it up, prime it up, get ready to paint it and paint it, having had a sort of accumulation of ideas leading up to it. So it was that process condensed, which was really exhausting, but kind of mentally and physically, because I brought the wood came down here, and I had that cut elsewhere, brought it down, constructed it, and it felt like if I hadn't had a plan. We sat down here on the Monday. We came and had a chat, and I think that was really important to have a action plan.
Yeah.
Because I was dictated by certain things. If I didn't prime it by, it's very boring, but if I didn't prime it by Wednesday, I couldn't have painted it, and I couldn't. It wouldn't have.
Yeah.
Actually, physically, the work wouldn't have come together.
Yeah.
So, like, you can have all these ideas, but if you're working with canvas and you're working with paint, you can't just go, that's fine, I'll knock it together in a day. It'll ultimately be dictated by the medium.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that I mean, you would maintain that you're going to make a painting on a canvas. Given the amount of time you have. Other than the fact that, like you said, you could have done any kind of work. Obviously, you maybe consider yourself to be someone who makes paintings and not a performance or whatever. But nevertheless, you specifically chose to make it on a canvas. As opposed to any other kind of artifact or object or that kind of thing. So, I'd like to know a little bit about why you chose a canvas-based painting to do in a week.
As in leading towards could it have been a board, for example, that I primed up and it would have been set up by Monday evening, possibly. Could have been
on the walls. That's a trope that you get in art galleries. It has a certain effect. The other way to think about it is that I was going to ask in a second about the nature of it. Maybe something which is a bit more of a site-specific installation, which happens to have paintings in it. You can sort of view it from that angle.
From different, I think there's something visually about a canvas back.
Yeah.
If it was a board, it would perhaps look too much like a wall. This is a canvas acting as a facade. It's acting as something, whereas I think a board or even painting on a wall could have been another way of coming at it.
Sure.
I think there's something to be said of kind of almost fusing two different things, and this is an installation of a painting, but it's a traditional. Yeah. In every sense, this is a traditional painting. It's on a canvas stretcher, which I think is really traditional.
Yeah. Well,
I suppose I'm interested in that.
You're interested in kind of playing with that tradition.
And the idea that, in a broader sense of existing in perhaps ever increasing technological art world as a painter, and rather than gimmicking up your practice, thinking how you can exist in a world in which you can do anything, because as you say, the possibilities are limitless.
Something which it seems to me, one of the effects basically that this seems to have is that so the exhibition is a small room with a giant painting in, and as you go in, the painting has its back to you, and you have to go around to look at the painting in a very close, confined space. One of the effects of that seems to be that it pushes the idea that the painting
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? Like, you go in, it has it back to you.
Yeah.
So you're already trying to look at it more than if you weren't. More than if you were trying to look at it normally.
Yeah.
You know, like, whereas if you go into a room with a giant painting, it looks at you.
Yeah.
You come in here, you're looking at it, basically. So you have to go around, and then you have the whole element that you're basically dealing with a giant painting in a small space, which is too big for it. So it's uncomfortable here. You know, it's like, it's not really meant to be here. Basically, it's too big. So it's all, in some ways, for me, it seems to have a certain message in it about how it's both painting is both important and cumbersome at the same time. Do you know what I mean? Like, you want people to be intimate with it, but you also are recognising the fact that it's like it is.
Perhaps it's a bit of a standoff.
Yeah, maybe. It kind of
painting and the viewer.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, you want to view it, and it's got to go around the way, I'm afraid.
Yeah, and it had an interesting effect on the private view.
Yeah.
Which is that people wouldn't really stand on this side of the painting.
They wouldn't. No one was here.
No one was here. And they were all round. They weren't exactly in front of it. They were in the sort of loading area between the two. It was too much. It was too much for them to talk.
People wouldn't stay here. I think it was really funny.
Yeah, Liam Gillick has a quote about how he makes work for people to stand in front of him and talk. But this sort of did the opposite.
Yeah.
But it wanted to be looked at, but it was just too intense to look at. You know, it's like, it's too big.
Yeah.
You know, it's too rude. It's a rude painting.
The thing is, being presented with like a blank back of something.
Yeah.
How can that be offensive? But it's true. People were not inclined, or perhaps people didn't feel comfortable standing here because it led up to viewing it from the front.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, well, it's just the back.
Do you have any particular thoughts about how this kind of painting installation works today in this context? Because it obviously has a bit of a lineage, you know, in the 1960s and before, and you know, when artists were playing with how to present canvases and playing with expectations from the viewer and basically undermining expectations. How do you think this operates now in that sense? Because it's obviously not like, whilst it isn't, I don't know how to put it really. Whilst it isn't original, it still undermines people's expectations today.
Yeah.
This kind of act as a painting display. Why is that? You know, why do you think?
I think I'm not too sure of my knowledge on the previous kind of wave of it is not great, but I presume that it feels, for me, it feels like a kind of pushing back, as in a backlash, a reaction to, and I presume that's kind of what the original people were doing as well. So I don't think I could have created this work had I had something to push back against. I mean, I chose to do a specialism course at BA, so it's fine art painting, which I had, if I had the choice again, I would do. I wouldn't do a fine art course because I think generally you're always going to be taught by someone who's a specialist in a field anyway.
Sure.
So I kind of like the idea of signing up for something that I know I'm going to receive. But I have felt for a long time that sometimes the potentiality of paint, it can be more than just presenting on a wall or and it's not, as I say, it's not to be gimmicky.
Sure,
it's to push back against a kind of general feeling of, well, this is kind of where paintings exist.
Yeah.
This is where they can be displayed. I like the idea of pushing back against that.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the actual content of the canvas.
Yeah.
Obviously, we just spoke about how it's set up in a room and how big it is and that kind of thing. But let's talk a little about what you've painted, like the actual forms. The forms on the canvas, basically. First of all, so I couldn't help but notice it. There's a big light bulb.
There's a big light bulb,
and there's also something I want to ask you as well is stripes.
Yeah.
We'll get to that in a second. But first of all, why
light bulb?
Yeah, why a light bulb?
Well, let you in kind of to where my mind has been in the last, I suppose, 6 months to a year, perhaps even longer.
Sure.
Just I've been interested in the mundane, and I mean that is it's very broad, I'm aware, but in getting the residency and coming in here, applying that idea of looking around at the ordinary and the perhaps overlooked, I just started drawing, and I always come back to drawing. But so that's kind of where the light bulb has come from. It's an interest that I have, kind of an interest that you're kind of aware of, but you kind of don't want to investigate because it leads to something interesting. So for me, I came in here, was looking around and drawing a lot, and I drew. There's those weird pipes, and it's kind of an odd space. It's like kind of lights everywhere, and these.
Well, there seems
the view from over there, when the canvases weren't full, was of this strip light as well.
Okay. Yeah.
So it linked in nicely, but the original seed was from I want to paint something that is here or around the idea of being here in this residency.
Sure. So there was effectively a fixation on fixtures, basically. Well, I've noticed that in your other work as well, with like pipes and radiators and clippings from catalogues, that kind of thing. Like
abundant imagery, I think, is that you aren't aware of.
Yeah.
You know, looking at a pipe perhaps in a way that you're forced to look at an advert.
Okay.
So
sure, yeah. Well, with that in mind, then, what led you to choose the style of painting to render that light on canvas? Something we spoke about was like, you obviously have, as a painter, you have a whole gamut of choices. You can go for, you can sort of paint a very realistic style, photorealistic style.
Yeah.
You can go very, very sort of abstract colour feel for the two ends of the spectrum, perhaps. You can do all kinds of things. So what led you to the particular kind of painting of that light?
I think for me it's always a distinction between those two, and it's trying to render it in an immediate way. When I paint the actual object, the light in this instance, it has to be a build-up of kind of energy, and it's done in one session. So it might be an afternoon or it might be an hour, but it has to be immediate, because I don't want it to be too much of a thing, if you understand, if that comes across. I don't want it to be so worked on that it's about the rendering of it, but it needs to be drawn, and it kind of needs to be representational. So almost, I suppose, the best way to put it is how little information can I give for it to still be recognisable?
Sure.
Rather than how can I overload someone with it's very good at shading on that top left area there. It's lovely.
Yeah.
It's kind of it's a bit of a game. How little information can I register for people to go, okay, it's a line.
Sure.
Which is quick as well, because it's immediate.
Yeah.
But it's quite.
It's an interesting way of thinking about it. Why paint? Why not, in that case, drawing? With like charcoal, etc. Like what leads you to want to
paint,
achieve that effect, but with oil paint?
I suppose a little bit is the challenge of it, as in it's a flat surface upon which you are. That's what painting is. It's rendering a space on on the 2D, and also just the love of paint. It's simply that I love looking at paintings, and I just think there's an incredible energy to a painting.
Sure.
Because of the time spent with it, but also because of
something about the way in which the way in which it's a very direct mark of.
Yeah, it's from you to it, and I don't think you can get more immediate than that.
Kind of like a fingerprint.
Yeah, it feels very made, I think, painting. And also, I think, cheekily, I was thinking about this last night, I think painting exists in a certain area of people's minds, and if you can kind of manipulate the fact that people are happy to go and see a painting, I think that's kind of impressive. Because if, for example, you take a Picasso painting and you look at when he was doing really revolutionary stuff and people would be outraged, but now people, I don't think you can be outraged by a painting because it's also, in a sense, been done before. Someone wouldn't come in and go, oh, that is, what an awful clash of colours. They might not like it taste-wise, but they wouldn't go, I've never seen this done before, it offends my kind of Titian-loving roots. I think it's kind of it's a way in to the work. Painting is a way in, rather than a standoff.
Sure.
Going back to the standoff, rather than it all being standoff like.
Sure.
You know, these are some huge conceptual ideas. It's like it's kind of like almost painting, and then there's layers of thought and ideas behind it, which people can go for if they want, and they can also appreciate it on a visual level if they want as well.
Sure, yeah. So I was going to ask you, to kind of follow on from that. In that case, is given the size of the painting, its content, its painting style, as it were, the style of brushstroke, its placement, the gallery, the amount of time you have to do it, given all of these elements that make up what is effectively the work.
Yeah.
What was most interesting about this whole process for you?
I think it was having an idea and now knowing that I've got the confidence to follow it through, as in trying to encompass all those things. As now you list them, that is a lot of things going on, but it's like spinning loads of plates and just trying to keep them all going and working as one. It's like bringing all these elements in of influence.
Sure. What was most interesting for you about the idea of doing residency?
I think the site specificity of doing it here, because it's nice to do something, as I say, to start with nothing and end with something in a week, and just be like, well, at the end of it, it's going to be down again, and someone else is going to be in here with their ideas and thinking what. It's almost like a project brief, which is a dangerous element to go down, but it's almost going like, you've got this, do something with it.
Whatever has restriction.
Yeah.
They can be very creative. They can create amazing things to have a restriction.
Yeah. And I think it's going to be an interesting thing to look at other people's work back and forward to what they do. Yeah. Because it kind of proves that you can take the elements and the idea of just being given keys and doing something.
I mean, it seems to me, having looked at the process that's gone on here, but also the kind of environment you're coming from, which is art school. Yeah. And then looking at the history of painting and what people idealise about the process of painting, it seems to me that the notion of time to make a work, to make a painting, it has a big impact, and it's one which is, again, there's like an ideal where maybe the old masters or whatever had forever. I know they didn't, but there's an ideal there that painting you can spend as long as you like, and create something which takes as long as you like. But the realities are that if you're in art school, you have a turnover date. You can't spend 3 years making one thing. No. For example, so you have that. You have a turnover amount, but then you also have this kind of small art gallery environment where there's literally a turnover amount of like a week. It's a very short one. But rather than that being, I don't want to pose that in terms of problem or not problem. Yeah. I think it's just
setting the scene in a sense.
Yeah, it's a function of the system that you're in. So I think it's really interesting to think about, or to ask you a question about, how, like, what you think about that time more generally on painting practices, like how that short time affects.
It's interesting that I think, in a sense, because you are quite free generally, but we have assessment points. So let's say they're every 6 months. For argument's sake, in art school. Yeah. And there's an arc. So generally they encourage you to experiment and kind of research, and then you reach a sort of, right, you're here, you can accumulate everything, create work, and then assess, and then it almost feels like that's the end point. Sure. So here has been that sped up, but it's also in art school, I think, generally people set themselves pressures that aren't there, so they'll go, well, I need to have it'd be amazing to go, well, I've spent 6 months doing a painting. But
Yeah.
people generally go, well, I've done loads of drawings and I've done loads of... So I think there is still a tendency. People set themselves a kind of idea of what needs to be created.
What effect do you think that has on contemporary painting, broadly speaking?
Broadly, I think you get to the end of a degree and you get people... It's like playing... If you played... the only analogy I can think of is... if you played the piano every day for 3 years, you, skill-wise, you would be able to play... I don't doubt it, you would be able to play something at the end of it.
Yeah.
Something that would register and people go, yeah, that's whatever.
Yeah.
And it's the same with an art practice. If you spend, up to 3 years painting, that's the majority of your time is done painting. Skill-wise, you're going to be able to do a competent painting. And so I think sometimes the most exciting time is sort of towards the middle, sort of beginning middle, rather than at the end, because at the end it's an idea heading to a degree show. Perhaps it's an idea of this is what the painting needs to be. So you get maybe very competent paintings, but they are just they're not just very nice to look at, or they are very.
Yeah. I guess what I was trying to get at with that question was, I guess what I'm still trying to get at really is, like a phenomenon which people don't recognise, which is that painting has a high turnover, like a very, very high turnover, and what that does to the economy of an artist trying to make things that they're interested in and that other people are going to be interested in, like how it's like a very specific time frame which people don't really talk about with their work. It's just kind of assumed that, for example, people would make paintings very quickly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Now, in an environment like this, you've obviously you were forced to deal with that head on as a very direct question.
Yeah.
And your response was science-specific work which focused on the space, which focused on like a consideration of the space through painting.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But a lot of paintings are made very quickly as portable artifacts still. So like you'll make a painting which takes maybe a month or something, and maybe even less.
Yeah.
And it'll be something which will maybe sit in your studio, possibly wishing to be shifted or not to other people, or wishing to be seen or not. But there's like a very high turnover there.
Yeah.
So I don't know what.
So painting more as a economically speaking, kind of easier way to make. Because is that what
well, I'm more interested in like how it affects meaning making.
Oh, I think definitely people aim or have a thing in the back of their heads that thinks, well, this is sellable.
Yeah. And
I think something that needs to happen a lot more is editing, i.e., your output.
Sure.
So.
Not the works themselves, but what works you show.
Yeah, which works are seen, because you could spend 3 weeks making, 3 paintings, or 3 weeks making 30 paintings, but actually, how many of those are what you kind of set out, not necessarily set out to achieve, because you might get something that really works or operates on a different level, but I think. You have to, in the back. What I'm trying to train myself to have is a kind of editing that goes, is this to do generally with what I want to project to other people, the ideas I want to project. And if something doesn't quite fit, it might still be a nice painting, and someone might go, "That's lovely. Like I really like that on my wall." But I think you have to separate yourself from that, because there can be a tendency to just have a kind of portfolio of work, and like ideas-wise, it goes up and down. But it's too much, I think.
Sure. So what you're saying then, in that case, is kind of like maybe it's more important to focus on how you represent yourself today than. Especially
there is so much imagery about as well, and I think the power of an image is lost when you have 10 of them, rather than if you have one. You can, if you wanted to find a painting on the internet, you could find it, and I think that poses a problem for painters, because you can have so many images that people were like, okay, right, I've seen it. So if you filter down, I don't think it's a bad thing to hold back a little, keep some of that distance.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much for your time.
No worries. Thank you.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. Thank you.
Thanks, Leo.